Maduro calls troops to fight against the US and says it's over for the Americans. Is the world on the brink of a new conflict? 8 warships, a nuclear submarine, thousands of American soldiers closing in on Venezuelan waters. And in response, Caracas is acting like it's already at war. For the first time in decades, Venezuela and the United States are face-to-face in escalation no one knows where it's going to end. But why now? What's the real reason behind this move? What does Maduro know? And what does he want the world to believe? The answer could change everything you think about this showdown that could impact the entire world. To understand the scale of this crisis, we first need to grasp why this particular region is so geopolitically crucial. The Caribbean isn't just a paradise tourist destination. It's one of the most important energy and trade crossroads of the modern world. Venezuela holds the largest oil reserves on the planet, estimated at over 300 billion barrels. To put that into perspective, that's more oil than Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq combined. The problem is those reserves are in the hands of a regime Washington sees as hostile and criminal. The Caribbean sea lanes move about 15% of the oil consumed globally. Tankers loaded with Venezuelan oil, Chinese industrial equipment, and goods from dozens of countries pass through these waters every day. Venezuela has already announced it is moving ships to protect its main oil export hub near Colombia, signaling that it sees the American presence as a direct threat to its commercial operations. The energy issue goes far beyond crude oil. Venezuela also has some of the largest natural gas reserves in South America and vast deposits of strategic minerals like gold, bauxite, and coltan, the last one essential for making electronic devices. China has invested more than $50 billion in Venezuela's energy sector since 2007, turning Caracas into one of Beijing's main energy suppliers. Washington officially calls this mobilization Operation Safe Caribbean, presenting it as an effort to intercept vessels transporting narcotics toward the United States. But the size and makeup of the force raise obvious questions about the real objectives. A Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine costs $3.2 billion to build and millions more per month to operate. These submarines are built for high-complexity missions, anti-submarine warfare, land attacks with Tomahawk missiles, and special ops. The 3 Aegis-class destroyers bring even more overwhelming power. Each ship carries up to 96 missiles in vertical launch systems, radars that can track hundreds of targets at once, and anti-missile defense tech capable of intercepting ballistic projectiles in flight. That's great power warfighting gear, not anti-narcotics patrol equipment. The presence of 2,200 Marines adds another intriguing element. Marines are amphibious assault troops trained specifically for beach landings and setting up footholds in hostile territory. For anti-drug ops, a tiny fraction of that manpower specialized in maritime interdiction would be enough. Analysts from the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London calculate that this operation is costing the United States about $15 million a week just in fuel, salaries, and maintenance. That's a massive financial investment for what is officially supposed to be routine patrol. Nicolas Maduro's reaction went way beyond what analysts expected. The mobilization includes housewives, retirees, and students lining up at enlistment centers in scenes reminiscent of preparations for full-scale 20th century wars. But let's break down those numbers. In previous military exercises held in January 2025, Venezuela managed to mobilize 150,000 people among soldiers, police, and militiamen, using 159 naval vessels, 50 aircraft, and 250 armored vehicles. That was considered an impressive display of organizational capacity for a country in severe economic crisis. The claim of 4.5 million mobilizable militiamen probably includes all citizens registered in paramilitary organizations, agricultural cooperatives, state unions, and community groups that have received some kind of basic training in recent years. Even if only 10% of that figure were actually armed and trained, it would still represent a paramilitary force of 450,000, bigger than many regular European armies. Maduro himself has been personally overseeing large-scale military drills in recent weeks, including live-fire training and simulations of attacks on strategic infrastructure. These actions show that Caracas is taking the American threat very seriously. The Venezuelan Ministry of Defense has ordered intensified naval patrols and the use of drones for coastal surveillance, signaling the country is preparing active defenses against a possible American approach. This military tension has deeply economic roots that need to be understood. China now absorbs 95% of Venezuelan oil exports through state-owned companies CMPC and CCRC, using production-sharing contracts to get around U.S. sanctions. Beijing isn't just buying oil, it's basically financing Maduro's regime's survival. Venezuelan oil has become a central piece in the strategic competition between the U.S. and China. While Washington tries to economically strangle Caracas with sanctions, Beijing offers a lifeline with investments, guaranteed purchases, and technology. It's a modern version of the Cold War, fought through oil contracts and trade routes. European companies like Repsol, Eni, and Morel and Prom face operational paralysis because of Trump-era sanctions, while Chevron Corporation got special authorization to keep limited operations, exporting about 250,000 barrels a day to Gulf Coast refineries. This creates an asymmetric market where the U.S. controls who can and cannot do business with Venezuela. The economic timing is crucial too. Global oil prices have climbed 12% in the last 3 weeks, partly due to uncertainty around Venezuelan exports. Each week of military tension in the Caribbean adds between $2 and $4 per barrel to global oil prices, directly impacting American, European, and Asian consumers. But to assess where this crisis could go, it's worth examining historical precedents of U.S. naval confrontations in the region. History offers patterns that help predict political and military behavior. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy ordered a naval blockade of Cuba with 183 American ships. The operation lasted 13 tense days, with at least 3 incidents that nearly triggered direct combat. A Soviet submarine almost launched a nuclear torpedo against a U.S. destroyer. A U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba, and another U-2 accidentally violated Soviet airspace in Alaska. Nuclear war was avoided by razor-thin margins, showing how technical incidents can quickly escalate tensions. The 1983 invasion of Grenada offers another model. Reagan used 7,600 troops to overthrow Maurice Bishop's government, a mission that lasted just 4 days. But Grenada had only 110,000 inhabitants and no real military capacity. Venezuela has 28 million people, regular armed forces estimated at 123,000 troops, and mountainous geography that would complicate any ground operation. More recently, in April 2019, U.S. ships took positions near Venezuela's coast during massive protests against Maduro. That operation lasted 6 weeks, with Washington sending a clear political message without provoking direct confrontation. The pattern suggests American shows of force in the region tend to be prolonged but avoid real combat. A crucial dimension of this crisis that many analysts underestimate is China's role. Beijing isn't a passive observer, it's a direct stakeholder with billions in economic interests on the line. The American military buildup and China's condemnation have put Venezuela and its role in the global oil industry back in the spotlight. China has invested more than $62 billion in loans and projects in Venezuela since 2007, making the South American country one of Beijing's biggest debtors outside Asia. Oil-for-loan contracts guarantee Venezuela delivers between 300,000 and 400,000 barrels of crude daily to China, even during political crises. These deals are structured to be nearly impossible to break. Beijing financed Venezuelan infrastructure, trained local technicians, and set up joint ventures that control entire oil fields. China's response to any potential American intervention would likely be economic before military. Beijing could sanction U.S. companies operating in China, manipulate commodity prices that hit the U.S. economy, or speed up de-dollarization of global trade. China has enough economic tools to make any American military action in Venezuela extremely costly. There's also a growing military dimension. While China doesn't keep permanent bases in Venezuela, it has been sending technical advisors and defense equipment regularly. Chinese radar systems monitor Venezuela's coast, and Beijing technicians help modernize the country's electronic warfare capabilities. The tension between the United States and Venezuela isn't happening in a vacuum. It's forcing regional countries to take tough positions that could redefine geopolitical alliances for decades. Colombia faces a particularly complex dilemma. As a traditional U.S. ally, Bogotá naturally supports American pressure on Maduro. But Colombia shares a 1,350-mile border with Venezuela and hosts more than 1.8 million Venezuelan refugees. Any military escalation could trigger another migration wave Colombia can't handle. The Colombian president has publicly pushed for a negotiated solution, while quietly allowing the U.S. to use Colombian bases for intelligence ops related to Venezuela. It's two-level diplomacy. moderate public support, secret military cooperation. Brazil has taken a more cautious stance. Brasilia recognizes the legitimacy of U.S. concerns about drugs and human rights, but explicitly opposes any military solution. Brazil hosts about 500,000 Venezuelan refugees and fears an armed conflict would trigger an even bigger exodus. Trinidad and Tobago, a small island nation, has turned into an unexpected strategic piece. Just 7 miles off Venezuela's coast, Trinidad serves as a base for Venezuelan refugees, smugglers, and potentially for U.S. intelligence operations. The Prime Minister of Trinidad has publicly called for de-escalation, fearing his country could become collateral ground for a bigger conflict. Cuba has maintained calculated public silence, but analysts believe Havana is advising Caracas on resistance strategies based on Cuba's decades-long experience under U.S. embargo. Cuban guerrilla warfare and civil resistance experts are reportedly training Venezuelan militias. To track this crisis like a professional analyst, there are specific indicators that show real escalation versus political theater. Movement of U.S. Special Forces is the first critical sign. If units like Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, or Delta Force show up in Colombian or Caribbean bases, it would mean prep for operations beyond naval patrol. Special Forces are sent weeks before complex missions for recon and ground prep. Evacuation of diplomatic and civilian personnel is an almost infallible indicator. If the U.S. orders embassy staff, American business employees, or NGO workers out of the region, it means Washington considers conflict imminent. Diplomatic evacuations precede military interventions in 90% of historical cases. Deployment of anti-missile defense systems in neighboring countries would signal the U.S. expects Venezuelan retaliation. Venezuela has medium-range missiles capable of hitting targets in Colombia, Guyana, and Caribbean islands. Mobilization of U.S. reservists or National Guard forces for special exercises traditionally precedes large-scale military operations. The Pentagon rarely calls up reservists for shows of force, only for real combat. Changes in reconnaissance flight patterns also reveal intentions. If American spy planes start flying daily over Venezuelan waters, or if high-altitude drones show up in the region, that means intensive intel gathering for future operations. We've reached the core point of this analysis. We are facing the most significant geopolitical crisis in Latin America since the Falklands War in 1982, but there's still time and space for diplomatic solutions. Neither Washington nor Caracas truly wants a real armed conflict right now. The U.S. knows military intervention would be politically and economically costly, especially after recent experiences in the Middle East. Venezuela knows it cannot win a direct military clash with the world's top power. But here lies the real danger. Historical conflicts often start by accident, not by deliberate strategic decisions. A nervous radar operator misreading a vessel approach. A drone pilot flying too close to a warship. A fishing boat in the wrong place at the wrong time. Military history is full of wars sparked by misunderstandings, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that triggered World War I, the Gulf of Tonkin incident that escalated U.S. involvement in Vietnam, the accidental downing of Iran Air Flight 655 by a U.S. cruiser in 1988 that nearly caused war between the U.S. and Iran. In the Caribbean of 2025, we've got all the ingredients for one of those historic accidents. Armed forces under extreme tension, sophisticated equipment operating dangerously close, political leaders under domestic pressure to show toughness, and limited communication channels between adversaries. What happens in the coming weeks could define not just Venezuela's future, but U.S. relations with all of Latin America for the next 20 years. If the tension resolves through negotiation, it could set a positive precedent for future diplomatic crisis resolutions. If it escalates into military confrontation, the economic, humanitarian, and geopolitical consequences will be felt for decades. For us, observers and citizens, what's left is to watch the signs closely, demand transparency from our governments, and hope rationality wins over political pride. Because at the end of the day, when great powers play geopolitical chess, it's always ordinary people who pay the price for miscalculations. History is still being written in the blue waters of the Caribbean. Let's hope it's a story of diplomacy, not conflict,